Welcome to part 8 of creating visual movie effects in Blender. In this video we're going to be blurring out or pixelating a part of a movie file and then animating where the video was pixelated using tracking. Let's go ahead and jump in. The first thing I'll do is I'm going to show you the footage that I'll be working with in this video. I actually shot a quick video using my cell phone of my laptop on my coffee table. So I will be blurring out, in this case, a logo, although you of course can use this exact same technique to blur out something like a face or a license plate or some piece of content that moves around in your video that you want to pixelate out. Let's go ahead and press escape, and I'll close this and jump back into Blender. The first thing I'll do, of course, is I'll click on my splash screen to get rid of it, and I'm going to grab this little crosshatched area and drag it over to the left to divide the window into two. We want to have two windows here. We want to have the node editor window in Blender on one side and a movie clip editor window on the other side to create a mask and to do our tracking in. So let's go ahead and switch this window type on the right over to a movie clip editor window right there. Of course, you click on this little button down here to change the window type. And again, down here, I'll click on that little button, and we're going to use the node editor window to do our compositing. I'm going to bring in my footage now, but before I can do that, I'm going to switch my nodes over to compositing nodes. By default, this little button right here says that this window, because it's highlighted, is in material nodes mode, and we're not adding materials onto 3D objects, so I'll go over to the compositing nodes tab, and then I'll click on use nodes and backdrop, and as soon as I do that, I get my first couple of nodes. Of course, I get a render layers node, which actually just takes your 3D scene that you're rendering out, which we're not doing 3D, and then it outputs it using a composite node right there, and they're attached using what's called a noodle. I don't need a render layers node, but I do need this composite node because that's what does the rendering out to an image or video file. So I'm going to click on render layers, and I'll press X on my keyboard to delete it. Let's go ahead and press Shift A on our keyboard. Shift A brings up the add menu, and I'm going to bring in some footage using under input movie clip. So these nodes are categorized into many different categories, and it's just sort of a process of doing this process many times to know which nodes are in which area, but under input I'll select movie clip. I'll place it right about there, and I'm going to connect this output port of the image that we're going to bring in using this node back out to our composite. Remember that when you're using nodes, especially compositing nodes, you need to always output to a composite so that you can render out. With the movie clip node, let's go ahead and click on open, and I'll go to my desktop where that video image sequence of still images of a video is of my laptop, and I'll press A on my keyboard. And in case you're wondering how to actually make a video file into a sequence of, in this case, JPEG image files, I'll put a link on the screen right now because in many of my earlier videos I demonstrated how to turn a video file into a sequence of images, so I'm not going to cover that anymore in my future videos. I've pressed A to select all of the images in this folder, and I'll click on Open Clip, and so now I have access. If I scrub through, I'm actually not going to see it yet in the backdrop of this window because I need to add, and I'm going to make this window a little bit wider by dragging on the border. I'm going to add a backdrop, and the way that you do that, besides having this little checkbox checked, is you have to add, so Shift A on my keyboard to bring up my add menu. I have to add an output right there and a viewer, and that viewer gives us access to what's happening, but this backdrop requires this viewer node. I'm going to press Shift A one more time, right now at least, and I'm going to add a layout reroute node, and that's a tiny little node that's just a little dot, and I can left click, or right click rather, to drag it around, and I can put it right in this noodle, and then I can left click and kind of create a Y in the road. So now I am outputting to both a composite and to this viewer, and as you can see, once I connected that up, I get a backdrop, and I can press V to zoom out and Alt V to zoom in, as you can see right there. So let's go ahead and I'll press V, and I'll just kind of scale it to this window size. There's my video, and if I scrub through, you can see that this footage is moving. So we're going to have to animate a pixelated area, but first, before we actually do the tracking, which will actually let Blender follow the movement of this Apple logo automatically, we're going to set up our nodes. So in case you need to stop right there after we get the node set up, you can, and then if you're not sure how to track, you can watch this video all the way until the end. Okay, let's go ahead and add what's called an alpha over node, because an alpha over node, if I press Shift A to bring up my add menu, and then I go to color and alpha over, this is the node that lets you stack videos one on top of the other, or different layers, whether they be video or images, any kind of visual medium. We can click on alpha over now, and I get this alpha over node, and I'll drag it right into this noodle. And right now it's putting a white image, or white because there is no image plugged into this input port, above the movie clip that I've plugged into the top image port. So it's a little bit backwards here. The bottom port here, if you plug another video into it, in this case I'm going to duplicate my movie clip node. So with it selected, I'm going to press Shift D on my keyboard to duplicate, and then I'm going to drag this port into that image port right there. And so now I'm basically stacking the same video one on top of the other using this alpha over node. Now this is not a very efficient node setup because I have the same node twice with the same movie clip loaded into it. So why instead of having two copies of it, why don't I just drag this same image output port to the second image input port, and then I can delete this unnecessary movie clip node. So that's a little bit of a tip. I know I've used the same clip twice in some of my past videos in this series, but now I'll just use this one, and I can drag different nodes into these two separate noodles and then organize it. It's a little bit harder to organize this way, but let's be a bit more efficient here. Okay, so we're going to actually cut all but a circle of this top video that's being plugged into the bottom port to show this Apple logo, which we will then be blurring out. So we can keep track of which video is which. I'm actually going to press Shift A on my keyboard, and I'm going to add a color RGB curves node and add it right in the top layer. That's the bottom port in the middle of this noodle there. And then with these RGB curves, I'm going to go to, this is red, green, and blue channels. I'll go to the red channel and just make this video red so we can tell the difference. And of course, if I switch these two around, this unaffected, this unadjusted layer is now on the top, so now you can see the difference. Okay, let's go ahead and make a mask. So over here in this movie clip editor window, I'm going to open the same sequence of images. In fact, I think I can just click on this little side film strip icon here and select the same 0001.jpg image. It's actually that whole image sequence. And on frame 1, I'll go back to frame 1 on my timeline, I'm going to make a mask. Right now, in this window, I'm in tracking mode, and so I want to switch over. I'll click on that little menu and change this window into mask mode, and now I can actually make a mask manually by holding Control and clicking, or I'll press Control Z a few times. I can just left click to put this cursor exactly where I want my mask to be, and over here on the Windows tool shelf, if you can't see that, you can press T on your keyboard. I can add a circle or a square very easily wherever this cursor is. So I'm going to click on add square in this case, and I'll with it selected, you can tell it's selected by having all points yellow. I'll press S. Actually, it's not letting me scale right now, or if I press R to rotate, it's not letting me rotate, and that tells me that down here on the pivot point little pull-up menu, I need to change the pivot point to median. By default, it's set to individual origins, which means you can't rotate each individual point, but I'm going to change it to median point, and now I can tap S to scale and move it around. When you're creating a mask, you want to make sure that it covers the entire area of whatever you want to blur out, and I'm actually going to hold Shift and left click and drag on one of the yellow points, and if you hold Shift and drag on one of the yellow points, it will create this extra green line which lets you know where your feathering is going to be. So this is not going to be just a square with a really hard edge on it. It's going to have some blending or some feathering outwards from the outside, and of course you can adjust each one, each point on your feathering outline individually to make a small feather or a large feather. It's up to you. Okay, I've got a mask. Let's call it Apple Mask, and I'll press enter. You can name it down here, and then back over in our node editor window, I'm going to input a mask. So I'll press Shift A to bring up my add menu, and I'll go to input, and mask. And again, wherever you find these nodes in these categories, it's sort of just a process of getting used to it and memorizing where things are. I'll go to input and mask. We're going to input that Apple mask and plug it into, actually I'll change that right now. I'll input the Apple mask right there, and I'll plug that into the factor of my alpha over. And what that will do is it will leave me just that square right above my Apple logo. So in other words, it's only showing this little section of the bottom input, which I have made red with this RGB curves. Now this is off right now, and the reason why that is, it's not in the same spot, the square is not in the same spot as it is over here, is because over here in the properties window on the right side of your screen, under the camera tab, we have our resolution of our render output set to 50%. So I'm going to click and drag that up. It's important to note that right now my footage is at the same resolution as this output resolution. So my original footage for my cell phone is 1920 by 1080. Actually, I actually converted it down from 4K when I made that image sequence that I have on my desktop. All those images are the same resolution, so it should work. We haven't seen it update. I turned that up to 100. It's not updating, so I'll just quickly drag through my timeline, and I'll drag it back down to frame 1. So now we can see this little red area above the rest of my video. Great, the mask was working. I don't want this RGB curves to be affecting it forever, so I'm just going to collapse it and we'll move it over here, and we're going to add some more nodes in here to make the pixelation happen. To make pixelation happen, unfortunately, there is no one node solution. There is a pixelate or pixelation, I can't remember what it's called, node, but it doesn't do exactly what you think it does. So let's go ahead and add it and see what it does. If I press Shift A on my keyboard and I go to, I believe it's under Filter, I can find Pixelate right there. So I'm going to add that. Again, it's under the Filter section of the node Add menu. So let's go ahead and drag this Pixelate node right into the middle of this noodle, and it doesn't do anything. Well, at least not anything that we can see, but it actually is doing something. Let me kind of explain what's happening here. This Pixelate node will, when you're scaling a video from a small video up to a large video, it will stop the pixels from being blended or interpolated to be smoothed out. That's what this Pixelate node does as far as I can understand. So what we're actually going to do here is we're going to scale this video way down on this top layer, which happens to be red right now, and then we're going to enable this Pixelate, and then we're going to scale it back up to the same resolution as our render resolution, or just 1080p. So let's go ahead and scale this video down, and we're going to put that right here. So I'll press Shift A on my keyboard, and we're going to go to the Distort section, and we're going to go to Scale right there, and I'm going to drag that scale node right into this section right here. And we're going to scale this video down by a lot. Right now it's at 1% or 100% or one value of its original size, but if I type in 0.5 and 0.5, you can see that just in this underneath window, the video got scaled down to half of its original size. I'm actually going to scale it down way less. I'm going to type 0.1 and 0.1. These are for the X and Y values, of course. And so now the video is 1/10 of its original size. It'll then be pixelated. That means it'll try not to smooth it out when it scales it back up. And so now I'm going to scale the video back up. In fact, I'm just going to select this scale node, and I'll press Shift D on my keyboard to duplicate it, and I'll put the copy over here, and now I'm going to scale it back up to its original size. So I'm going to go to, actually I'll leave this at relative, but because we scaled it down to 0.1, which is 1/10 of its original size, I'm going to scale it 10 times on the X and the Y. And so now, as you can see, the Apple logo is pixelated, and so we have basically a finished result. Now, if I don't like this amount of pixelation, and we haven't tracked the Apple logo yet, so if I try to scrub through my video, you'll get an idea, but that little square is not following the Apple logo, it's just staying in one spot. Let's go ahead and drag the playhead back to frame 1 so we can see what we're looking at. I can adjust these two values here. Let's say I type in 0.01, which is 1/100th of its original size. 0.01 for both x and y values. I can then type in, instead of 10 and 10, I can type in 100 and 100, and as you can see, it becomes very, very pixelated. I could try 0.02 and 0.02, basically any value that goes evenly into 1. So 0.02 multiplied out by 50, I believe. This brings my math back into working with these numbers. 50 times 0.02 is, again, 1. So these two numbers have to multiply out to 1. Now, instead of always changing these two values and have to actually figure out what values work out properly to 1 or to multiply to 1, I'm going to use a few math nodes. And don't be scared off by this, it's quite easy. If I press Shift A and I go to Converter and Math, this math node gives us access to different math functions. In this case, we're going to use multiply, and don't be scared. If I type in 1 and let's say 2, and then I connect this value up to, actually, pardon me, I need to change this to a divide node, so I'll change this to divide. And if I divide 1 divided by 2, that gives me 0.5. If I divide 1 by 10, that gives me 0.1 or 1/10. So I can use these two values and output them both to the x and to the y. And then I can just know that, hey, if it's going in 10 times, I can change these values over here to 10 and 10. And so the Apple logo will appear again, but blurred to be 10 times each pixel individual size. Now, we can make it even easier for us if I duplicate this math node and make a multiply node. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to select the divide node, press Shift D, and just move that down here. I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see all my nodes again. There's my alpha over. I'll put these up on the screen once I finish this section of the video. And I'm going to change this divide node to a multiply node. Now, if you want to have 10 in here, why not just have 1 times 10 over here and plug it into this port right here? This value is always going to be 1, but now I can take this multiply node and plug the 10, or the value that's being outputted, which is 1 times 10, which is 10, into both of these x and y scale ports. What this allows us to do, and I know it's a little bit of a complicated node setup, is with this multiply node now, I only have to change one value. If I type in 15, the pixels will get 15 times bigger. Oh, pardon me, I had this clamp checkbox accidentally checked, so I'll turn that off. And as you can see now, the pixels individually are all 20 times bigger. If I type in 50, the pixels will get 50 times bigger. So now we have a very easy way of changing the size or the amount of pixelation. Okay, we've got our node set up. I now no longer need this section to be reddish, so I'm going to select this RGB curves node and I'll press Control X on my keyboard. Control X will delete this node but leave the connecting noodle intact, so I'll press Control X, and now I've got a pixelated Apple logo. So what I'll do is I'll press Control Up on my keyboard, and Control Up will make this window full screen. And if you want to copy this node setup for yourself, it's on the screen right now for you, but in just a sec we're going to go over into tracking to make the pixelated area follow the Apple logo. Okay, let's go ahead and make this not full screen, so I'll press Control Up arrow on my keyboard again, and I'll go over here to my tracking and mask movie clip editor window. Right now I am in mask mode. I've created a mask, but let's go ahead and jump now over to tracking mode right there, and the mask goes away. What I have to do is I have to specify a part of this overall video, in this case the Apple logo, that I want Blender to track, to follow along as it moves around in the frame. Now because I kind of rotated the camera around, we're not going to get a perfect track where it's not going to happen that easily. We might have to track this manually for several frames, but let's go ahead and hold Control on our keyboard, and then with Control held down, I'll left click on the Apple logo, and when I control click, of course, it makes a new tracking marker, but it's way too small, so I'll press S on my keyboard and drag my mouse out, and I'll make the tracking area or the tracking square take up the entire Apple logo. I want to make sure I know where the center of this tracking marker is, so I'm going to line it up with the bottom of the leaf and the middle of this little bite out of the apple. So I'll press G to move it around, and I'll put it right about there. That looks pretty good. If your footage moves fast, you might want to display your search area. When it's going from frame to frame in the video, it's actually looking in the next frame and seeing where this is, but it won't search the entire video. If I go down here to marker display on my, you can press N to show this panel if you don't see it, to enable the search area view. I can now see my search area, and I can make this bigger or smaller depending on the speed of the motion in the video. Okay, let's go ahead and track. I'm only going to track location here, which means as the apple kind of skews and scales and rotates, it's not going to follow it that well, but let's go ahead and try it out. Down here on the tool shelf, which you can press T to show, I'm going to track forward now. But actually, I'm going to click on prefetch first. That will load with this purple bar. That's what this displays, is the loading of your video into Blender. In this case, it's the sequence of images that we're loading in. I'm going to click on prefetch, and that will load the entire sequence of images, or as much as Blender's memory can allow. And let's go ahead and press forward track. Okay, so it made it all the way to frame 165, and then at 166, it lost the tracking. So if I scrub through now, you can see the motion and the frames where it did work. And then right here, you can look at this yellow line. At frame 165, there was successful tracking, and then I'll use my arrow key at 166. This little preview goes away, and so it was not successful. I'll just press G on my keyboard, and again try to line this up with the tip of the leaf and the middle of this, so right about there. And I'll keep on tracking. I'll press forward track again. And it got lost at 182, so I'll just fix it. I'm not going to be too picky here because we are blurring this section out. Okay, I got lost at 183 again, so it depends on your footage. Okay, so because of the low contrast of this Apple logo compared to the gray surrounding laptop surface, I'm having a hard time tracking it. And so I've just been having to track each frame, or place each marker on each next frame manually. In every frame it got lost. So I'm just going to cut off the tracking of this video at frame 200. I'll click in the end value down here, and I'll type in 200 and press enter. We'll just go until that point. Great, so if I scrub through now, if I zoom out by scrolling down and I scrub through, I've got a successfully tracked Apple logo that I want to blur out. Okay, let's go ahead and parent my mask to this tracker. So I'm going to go back to frame 1 because that's where we created our original mask. And let's go ahead and go back into masking mode. But first, I'm going to press A on my keyboard with my mouse in this window, and A will deselect the tracker. And so now let's go back into mask, and I'll press A few times to select the entire mask. Then I'll hold Shift, and we're going to select the tracker, and then press Control P to parent the mask to the tracker. So with the whole mask selected, I'll hold Shift and right click on the tracker, and then I'll press Control P, and right now I'm in frame 1, so the mask is in the right spot. So Control P, and it parented the mask to the tracker. And so now if I scrub through, you can see that, if I zoom out, that the mask is following the motion of the tracker. And I'm not too picky about how, or if the mask is actually staying the right scale or rotation compared to the Apple logo, because again, we're pixelating this out. As long as it covers up the entire logo, we are good. So I have this mask. It's moving around now because of the tracker. Let's go ahead now and jump back over to our node editor window, and if I kind of move these nodes away and I scrub around, you can see that my Apple logo is now totally pixelated out in all of the frames. And of course, I can adjust that value down for the amount of my pixelation. So if I want to be less blurred, I can type in a lower value. Let's go ahead and type in maybe 25. Okay, so we've got a pixelated out logo. Let's go ahead and render this out to a video file. So over here in my properties window, under the camera tab, I'm going to change for a video file. Under output, we're not going to render out to a PNG sequence of image files. We're going to render out to an H.264 And then under encoding, we're going to change format from AVI to MPEG-4. And MPEG-4 is a very common video format with this H.264 video codec compression that they use on most devices and on most websites like YouTube. So let's go ahead now and change the output location. I'll just click on this little folder, and then I'll go to my desktop, and I'm going to call this a laptop pixelated final. And I'll click on accept. And now that I've got an output location and we're rendering out to an H.264 MPEG-4, I can click on animation and it will render out the entire start to end 200 frames. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll speed this part of the video up because we'll have to process every single frame. Alright, so it's finished. Let's go ahead and minimize Blender, and on my desktop there's my finished video file. Let's go ahead and check it out. Alright, so that's a pretty successful result. In the very last part of this video I will put those nodes back up on the screen in case you missed them. So I'll close the video, I'll open Blender back up, press escape and control up arrow, and there we have it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, bye-bye.